Okay, welcome everyone. This is the webinar for ClickUp for marketing agencies. So we'll get kicked off in just a couple of minutes. While we're waiting, can you chuck in the chat, where are you calling in from? So I'm currently calling in from Brisbane, Australia. Let's see what we've got around the world. Awesome. So a few from America, Los Angeles and New York City, Norway, Chicago, Portland, Delaware, Canada, welcome. Atlanta, South Jordan, South Africa, awesome. And another one from Melbourne, Pakistan, UK, Canada, California, awesome. Oxfordshire, nice. Toronto, Germany, welcome. Romania, welcome. Brazil, awesome. Hungary. Looks like we've got America and Europe pretty well represented. Phoenix, New Zealand, welcome. Austin, Texas. Qatar, welcome. Kenya, welcome. Turkey. Trinidad and Tobago, awesome, welcome. Germany. Guatemala, welcome. Lithuania. Very cool. Italy, welcome. Awesome. It's always good to see where everyone's from. Egypt, welcome, welcome. Okay, so we're about on the hour now. So just to recap, this is the ClickUp for marketing agencies webinar. I'm going to dive into the content in just a minute. Welcome everyone for coming. It's good to be here with you. So this is our webinar today, and I have a special guest that I'm going to welcome on in just a few minutes, Amara, who I'll introduce then. So first of all, some housekeeping. So this is approximately what you'll see in Zoom. You've got a few buttons up the top here. Key things to note is down the bottom, you have chat and QA. Be aware that chat, useful for talking to each other, but really not going to be monitored. But if you have a question, use the Q&A button. So we have an awesome team of ClickUp support staff who are actually monitoring the Q&A, and we'll be answering questions as we go through the webinar. So if you do have a question, chuck it in there. If it is something that's kind of useful for us to explain to everyone, we might leave it to the end. We'll have a quick questions section at the end, where we'll go through and answer a few of those questions as well. Awesome. Okay, this webinar will be recorded. The recording will be automatically emailed to you after the webinar. It'll also be available at clickup.com/webinar. Okay, so a few things we're going to kind of cover today. We're going to look at what to look for to find the right PM tool for you, is what I should say. Common issues agencies run into, how to overcome them, the key to keeping your team on the same page, the optimal setup in ClickUp for projects, tasks, lists, and handoffs, so that things don't slip between the cracks, particularly when they're going in between people, and how to keep a pulse on what's going on in your agency. And at the end, as I said, we'll have some questions. Okay, so without any further ado, I want to introduce Amara. So Amara runs a successful marketing agency. First of all, she's a ClickUp consultant, but also does this in real life. And she helps her agency clients set up ClickUp so that she can tell them the kind of the tough truth about what it takes to run a marketing agency successfully. So I often send clients to her when a marketing agency client really needs help with processes and to kind of get their stuff together. So if I ever run into that, I send them through to Amara, and she does an awesome job. So I'm going to welcome Amara on screen, and I'll stop sharing here. Okay, welcome Amara.
Hi, Justin. Hello, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can hear you well.
Excellent. Although this is my fancy schmancy Zoom background, I am in lovely Southern California. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you guys can check out my wonderful slides here. Hopefully you guys can see that okay. All right.
Well.
Excellent. So again, my name is Amara AmaraREPS. I run a growth agency. We're a team of 12 here in Long Beach, California. And I know there's going to be a bunch of different kinds of agencies in here of all shapes and sizes. We have branding agencies, we have advertising agencies, we're going to have web development agencies, we're going to have inbound agencies. folks that do consulting. So my approach today is to try to help you all, based on where you're at. So the general information that I'm going to be presenting today will hopefully fit as many of you as possible. For those of you that do this work, you might be experiencing the same challenges that I've experienced over the last 12, 13 years, trying to manage all of these different types of things in one portal, which is why most project management systems tend to be the bane of our existence, if you will. And one of the big problems that I want to get into first is software fatigue. So about 13 years ago, when I first started out, the first project management tool I used obviously was my email. Next was probably a notepad of some sort. And when I finally got my stuff together, I stumbled upon Basecamp. Basecamp was the tool to rule them all, way back when. And eventually, their minimalistic approach to project management just didn't work. We just have way too much going on. There's a lot happening in marketing agencies, so we just needed better tools. So then I went on the hunt for another tool. We used Trello for a while, and that didn't work. Several tools later that no longer exist, we landed on Teamwork for a few years. And Teamwork was great. However, I'm not here to bash any of these tools. I'm just saying why they did or didn't work for me. If any of you guys are leaving Teamwork or on Teamwork currently, I'm going to speak directly to my experience on Teamwork. But there's a few reasons why I left. One, their support was awful. I'd ask a question, it would take several days to get back to me. I didn't like where their project management tool was going as far as development. I love that ClickUp provides a roadmap to and it has visibility in the different things that they're building and adding onto the system. I felt like their system was most definitely going in the wrong direction. Instead of making their project management tool better and more usable and things connect more, it was they were building CRMs, they were building all these other things that didn't really matter and didn't really help me. And it was just really frustrating. And it didn't seem like they were ever going to fix the issues with their system. So it took me a couple of years to actually land on ClickUp. But in that meantime, I tried ProofHub for a few months. I tried Rike. They had some really cool tools in there that that kind of talk about some of the challenges that some of us agency folks have with review processes and things like that. So I was really attracted to that, but I found it to be super disjointed. Asana was cool, but it didn't give me the flexibility that I needed. Acello, the sales rep, didn't ever get back to me. So I just dropped that tool. Maven Link had some really cool stuff too, but again, a lot of it was super disjointed. And then I landed on ClickUp about a year and a half ago. And I fell in love with it just because, we do some web development. So I could totally see that this tool was going to allow me to organize my data in a usable way so that I could have the flexibility to manage the projects that I need to manage in the ways that they needed to be managed. And I'm going to get into that in just a second. So one of the biggest problems that I see agencies run into, one of the things when people reach out to me as a vetted consultant for ClickUp, they say, oh, I need help implementing it. And one of the questions that I ask is what system you're coming from, and do you have an actual project management methodology in place? 9 times out of 10, they don't. I'm saying all this to say no software will solve all of your problems. The software is not the key. And I think that that's where a lot of these softwares run into problems. They make all these promises that they can literally solve all these problems within your business, but it's mainly a tool to manage data, right? And it's there to manage your systems. So software is not going to solve the issue of your systems and processes not being in order. If you're like maybe a bookkeeper or in a different type of industry, you might get away with having a software solve a lot of issues. But for agencies, this is especially true. If you do not have systems in place, if you do not have processes in place, that is going to be the thing that is going to have you hop from tool to tool to tool to tool. No tool will solve that. So today, I hope that ends your tool hopping challenge for now. One of the first things I do when I work with other agencies is talk about their systems and processes. When we're doing our consultations, the first 3 consults are all about systems and processes before we even touch implementation within ClickUp. And that's literally going to save you tons of time trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. A lot of people look to the system to create their systems and processes, which is totally the wrong way to do it. And then they say, oh, well, the system didn't work. Well, the system technically only didn't work if your systems are not able to be managed within that software. Proper planning will help you find the right tool. If you actually have your systems in place, and we'll go through what those systems need to be in a second. If you have your actual systems in place, it'll help you determine how your data needs to be structured, and if that system can handle that data in the way that you need it, so that you can actually make actionable decisions within your business and manage all aspects of your projects. Okay, this is problem number 1A. It's just as bad as the system hopping, but the lack of standardization. We're all marketers, we all work with data in some sort of fashion, right? So I'm gonna just kind of say this in a very direct way. If you don't have standardization in the way that you do your project management, it's gonna make it literally impossible to run reports and analyze your data. Let me kind of illustrate that in a more concise way. One of the things that I see most agencies come to me with is everyone's using the tool in a different way within their company, which is part of the problem. We all know the old saying, garbage in, garbage out, right? If everybody is managing tasks a different way, creating tasks in different ways, how do you expect to manage workload? If some tasks have estimates and some tasks don't, as far as time, how are you going to manage workload? Some people are like, oh, to heck with time tracking. It's too cumbersome. It's too this, it's too that. Well, if you don't have a time tracking mechanism in place, you can't manage workload. Or if you don't have sprint points or some sort of mechanism, it's going to be really, really hard to come up with those magical dashboards that you see all over the web that people create. You have to have some standardization to how you manage your tasks. One of the other things that I see is a lack of established hierarchy and processes for your PM tool that is being used. And so I'm going to kind of show an illustration of what that looks like. But I often see folks using lists to manage tasks, using tasks to manage lists, spaces to do one thing for one project, and it just becomes a mess. You have to have a hierarchy and you have to do it the same way each time in order to have usable data. Sorry for the typo. Key roles, ownership, and handoffs are not clearly defined. I think that's supposed to be key metrics. Key metrics, roles, ownership, and handoffs are not clearly defined. I get a lot of requests. I need a dashboard for my business. Great. What kind of stuff do you want to look at? And people have no idea. Well, dashboards are only as good as the data. And if no one on your team is going to look at it or knows what to do with that data, it's kind of pointless. And so I always work backwards. Again, we start with the planning and then we work backwards to see what kind of information we want to glean. And we just start to add more and more metrics as we go along, as we start to use our tools a little bit better. The thing about the roles is super important. I think that a lot of people, agency owners, project managers, etc., expect their implementers, people who are actually doing the work, creatives, etc., to be project managers and to properly manage themselves. But when you take a step back and actually look at the flow of work that comes within our agency, if you're anything like my agency, I have 40 plus, 50 plus active clients at a time. We have hundreds of tasks per week that we're managing. And so if you've attempted to set up ClickUp or any project management tool, you dump all your tasks in and now you're like, okay, now what? How do I find the first thing I'm supposed to be working on? That should be your first goal. Forget your dashboards. Your first goal should be that your team members should be able to find your tasks easily and not be trying to learn how to use ClickUp their first few days, because you're going to burn a bunch of time and resources every time you hire somebody. Your onboarding process for new team members should be very succinct. Here's how you find your task. Here's how you time track, if you do time tracking of some sort. Here's how you hand off tasks in between various people. Here's how we handle approvals. And here's how you know when a task is ready to be worked on. Here's how you know when a task is closed. Ownership is also important. A lot of smaller agencies tend to not have project managers, and some larger agencies don't have project managers, which tends to be a problem. And so, and even still, the project manager that's on board, this is definitely my Achilles heel. So if some of you guys are project managers on here, I'm definitely saying this to you. Project managers will build a process around themselves. And then when they quit, that process completely leaves. And that process doesn't necessarily reflect the needs of the business from the back office side, right? From fulfillment, from all those different things. It makes it easier for them to, find, to achieve their goals, which is figure out what the rest of the team is doing, be able to point fingers at who's behind, right? But if you're a CEO, you have different objectives and things that you need to monitor. Or if you're an account manager, you might have different things that you need. And so building a system around one person and how they do things is often a huge issue that I see among project managers. And yes, I'm talking to you if some of you project managers have done that, because it's a big no-no. Handoffs, big issue as well. A lot of tasks go, especially if you're dealing with a huge volume of tasks at any given time, not properly handing those off. So when you go back, if you don't have a system defined, when you go back and see like what happened, why did this task fall through the cracks? If you don't have a system for doing that, you can't say, well, sir or ma'am or person, you didn't tag so-and-so, or you didn't do this handoff properly. That's why it got dropped, right? It kind of just happens, however. And then also agencies are just always reinventing the wheel. Every time they get a new customer, they don't have a system in place every time they land a new project or they have a new contract. Definitely want to get those items squared away before you start implementing things into any kind of PM tool. Utilizing templates is also a great way to facilitate that. So one of the things that you want to do is have a consistent project structure. There are many different schools of thoughts on how you should structure your projects. There's other agency consultants that are vetted that do it different than I do, but I, for different reasons, do it this way. I'll explain more about that later. For me, I use spaces to manage my client. Each client has a different space. The only other space that I use is my different departments. So for example, my business development stuff gets managed very differently than my client stuff. So my statuses for every single client is exactly the same. Every single client, every single project, every single everything, so I can manage it in one huge global view. I'll show you how that works in a minute. My business development stuff has a different process. So I have different statuses for those, for my clients, for that department or what have you, that business area. My operations, HR, et cetera, has its own space because that gets managed a little bit differently. And so does my accounting. So I only have 2 or 3 other spaces that are specific to my business that manage those other things, just because they have different processes and I have different views that I need, but everything else that's a client has its own space. My folders are projects. Now, I'm going to break this down to the ridiculous. For those of you that have multiple clients and have different people within your agency, are you able to hand off billing to somebody within your company, or are you the CEO or account manager having to do your own billing because it's every single client gets billed a bunch of different ways and nothing matches up, so no one can figure it out? You have to spend 2 hours, 3 hours, 5 hours, 8 hours every month trying to cobble everything together and figure out how to, what billing goes where and where projects are at. Or even worse, you can't even tell if you're on track with time and your estimate or what have you. It's because there's no congruency between your project management system and your billing software. So for me, I have a naming convention that I use for all of my folders because they equal a contract or equal some sort of, they connect in some way so that my business manager, when she handles the billing at the end of the month, she can allocate time to those different projects and so on and so forth, so that there's some congruency there and it actually means something versus just saying, Acme widgets, project, social media, or such and such ad campaign, right? I also use lists within those projects for different service types. And I even have a naming convention for my service types. I use EverHour as an integration with ClickUp to manage my projects and budgets and stuff like that. So I can actually break down the types of services when I'm running reports and things like that, so I can see, which types of services are more profitable, which ones are going over budget, which ones aren't, et cetera, et cetera. And then I put my tasks within each. So if I'm running a full funnel campaign of some sort and it's a retainer, I'll have my retainer folder, and then I'll have an advertising list. I'll have my content list, my content marketing list. I'll have my web development list. So all those tasks that pertain to those different teams and those different types of services that we offer within that retainer are all within there. So it's a little bit easier to find, a little bit easier to manage, and I can filter that information out later on in reports. One of the things that I'm going to kind of give you some examples of what happens when you have your stuff standardized. So this is what I like to call the minimally viable task. So every single person that is tasked with creating tasks on your team needs to be creating tasks the exact same way within an agency. I cannot tell you how important that is. Otherwise, if everything looks different, you'll never be able to hold anybody's standards, and everything's just going to be a huge mess. If you're already experiencing that, that's probably why. So when I'm documenting these processes with my teams and with other agencies, we go through and say, okay, number one is the task title. Here's the naming convention for that. Number two is the description. Here's where we put that information. For those of you that have SOPs and things like that, we actually have a custom field for our SOPs because we use a different app to manage our SOPs or what have you. But sometimes we'll also put additional information within the description here from our for our tasks. 3 is estimate. Every single task must have an estimate so that we can manage workload. Every single task must have a due date. Now, if it's something that takes a little bit longer, it must have a start date. Some of our tasks, some of our parent tasks are actual milestones. So sometimes I'll put the actual milestone task will actually have a start date and an end date where we need to start the first part of the task and end the end part of the task. I think I have 3 5s on here. Good grief. We use Agile, some version of Agile, right? So our sprint tags go here so that we can divide up our tasks based on the weeks in which we need to start working on them within our everything view. So that if you have multiple clients that you're working on, you can see every single task that needs to be worked on throughout your entire space in one place. If you want to use the actual sprint folders that ClickUp has as a function, I think that's why I had 2 4s. You can also use that here. That goes here. Priority, super, super, super important. A lot of people can't figure out how to manage priority for their tasks when you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tasks. This is how you do it. You can sort and create views of priority. And these things will change when you're a project manager. You need to, if things are becoming overdue, if things are whatever, you can change these priorities. If you use some sort of agile, follow some sort of agile methodology, you can go in during your sprint, your stand-up meetings or what have you, and make these adjustments daily based on what's on everybody's plate or whatever. Again, I use some, modified version of Agile for my agency because Agile in and of itself is great for one project. It's great for software. Marketing moves way too quickly. Things are changing so fast. It's too strict for my needs and for the amount of projects that we have. So I've modified Agile to fit my needs there. So once you've kind of created that level of standardization, here's what you can accomplish. I threw these slides in at the last minute, but this is our everything view. This is literally every single project across for every single client across our space or within our workspace. And you're able, instead of your team trying to go into their task view to try to figure out what kind of work they need to do for the week, me as a CEO, I can see every single task. Your folks on your team, your implementers, because I say there's two key roles that every agency has to have. Bigger agencies might have 3 or 4, but the first role is your implementers. They've got to be able to find their tasks easy. Standard, lists, standard task lists do not help you with priority. They do not help you ascertain status and things like that. So we use this board view to see at a global level every single task across every single client. And then you can click this little me button and see what you got for yourself. Our leads and stuff have different views that they can see for the projects that aren't necessarily tasked to them, but the tasks and stuff that they're leading, which is really great. There's a lot of really cool things that you can do with this view. Make it a lot easier. So literally, when we onboard our team members, it's like, hey, here's where your tasks are. Don't go anywhere else. Don't look at your emails. Don't look at this is where you manage your tasks. So if someone says, hey, I can't find my task, we first check is, did you check your board? And that's just something that we just keep saying over and over again when they come on the team. Next, you can manage workload, which is fantastic. Super easy. Now that I use my sprint tags, so now I can see how much work everybody has on their plate for the week. Timothy has 287 hours. Oops. So I probably have some stuff that needs to get reorganized or moved around. Tyson has 60 hours. So there's some work I need to go in and do to kind of move some things around. Maybe there's some placeholder tags or tasks that are in there that he really doesn't have to work on. And then I can also see which tasks don't have estimates. So I know how to go in there and filter those things out and make sure I add estimates to those things. So your project manager is one of their things that they're gonna have to do. So if you're a CEO and you have a project manager, you can say, hey, how come all these tasks don't have estimates, right? You can kind of hold them to that. So it actually gives you things to manage. One of the things I didn't take a screenshot of sprint by priority. You can I actually created a board where it's filtered by my priority tag. So the stuff that have the red tags, firefighter, pants on fire type stuff, gets done right away. And I know what those things are. The things that are kind of like super urgent due today, I can kind of see as well within that priority view. Next, you're able to manage profitability, budgets, and more. I'm really trying to sell the idea of standardization, but this is kind of my view that I have in EverHour or what have you. So hopefully that was valuable for you guys. Problem number 3 is there's usually a huge disconnect between billing and production teams, right? Some of the administrative questions you want to ask yourself is, what happens when I land a new client or a new additional project for a client, right? Like, what are my different scenarios in which I have new things handed to me, and how do I handle those? Do I handle them different every single time? Going back to reinventing the wheel. You've got to document a process for that. Like, how do I want to handle that? It'll create a lot less stress for you. And these are things that you can hand off for those of you that have smaller agencies where you're the CEO trying to handle everything. You can hand that off to somebody and say, or even create some automations. Standardization allows you to actually utilize automations properly. So again, figure out what this needs to be. And then when you map out this process, figure out what parts of it you can automate. Sorry about that. Figure out which parts of that you can automate. A lot of folks are like, I need automations, blah, blah, blah. And then they do things a million different ways. And then they wonder why their automations don't work. This is why. Who handles your billing and back office? Like, if your systems aren't tight enough to where someone else can handle it and only one person has to spend millions and millions of hours trying to figure it out, that's a problem. You're gonna have to peel that back. For some folks, when I'm consulting with agencies, again, I haven't even talked about like the ClickUp piece. This is just the agency management side of things, right? Some folks have like 100 different ways that they manage their billing, and no wonder why it takes them so long to do billing at the end of the month, or why it's off, or why they're guessing. You might need to consolidate that. Handle retainers one way, handle projects another, handle one-off projects another, handle your change orders another way, et cetera, et cetera. And like I say here, do you have it systemized so that you can hand it off to somebody else someday, right? For those of you smaller agencies. Can you run reports like project P&Ls, workload, et cetera? If you can't, then look at why. Can you look at your projects at a glance, daily, weekly, or monthly, and know where you are budget-wise? This is the 100% reason why I left Teamwork. I was not able to look. Every time I needed to see where I was at with the budget on a project, it took me 2 hours to cobble everything together and figure it out because all the different systems didn't connect. Are my billing practices consistent from client to client, or at least project type to project type? Are my clients' billing needs documented if they differ from how we typically bill? There are, when you work with bigger clients like municipalities or publicly traded companies, or just bigger companies that have actual departments that handle billing, sometimes you can't say, hey, you have to do it my way or the highway. Sometimes you have to conform to how they bill. And so if and when that happens, there is billing that is outside of how we bill, or we have to accommodate a billing need outside of how we bill, that client has a documentation place for our accounting person to go in and handle that so that they know how that needs to happen. So they look there when they say like a bill's, at the 30-day mark or at the 45-day mark. Oh, okay, well, this person's not 60. We don't bill this person beforehand, we bill them after. Whatever their situation is, you have that documented and you can create tasks for that person. And so on and so
would
forth.
you do that with like a doc on that client's space, for example?
I use a different tool for my SOPs and things like that. I use Guru. And so because it integrates really, really well with Slack or what have you. So when we're having conversations or whatever, I can, just shoot Guru cards to people. It also allows you to like have the SOP open with on top of your screen, so you're not having to switch between tabs. You can literally follow the SOP while you're on that screen or what have you. So every client has their own like collection of SOPs. So, we have our standard operating procedures, but there's always some little variances. So we just copy them and put those little document those little variances as they happen.
Cool.
So yeah. Great question. Problem number 4, no one is a project manager. So if you're the CEO, congratulations, you're a project manager until you hire one. Not having a project manager or someone that really owns how this thing is supposed to work is where the biggest problem that I see. And when CEOs don't realize that they're the actual project manager when they don't have one task, they kind of look at me like I'm crazy. But what happens is you can't point out project inefficiencies when you don't have a project manager, or at least no one's tasked with looking for those project inefficiencies. Projects and tasks fall through the cracks. You build out a billion different tasks, a billion different ways, and don't have any templates, or maybe you have a template, whatever. You end up having tasks fall through the cracks. There's a huge lack of priority or ability to establish priority for tasks because no one's tasked with doing that. Implementers are not project managers. They don't know how to do that. They don't have a full scope of what's going on in the entire company. So they're not able to do that. Someone has to be tasked with doing that in the business, somebody. And if you don't have one, it's got to be you, the CEO. Project management becomes dependent on a person's individual project management preferences versus being based on the needs of the company as a whole. I know I harped on that earlier. It's a huge, huge issue that I see with agencies where one person ends up being the gatekeeper of how they manage themselves versus how the company needs to be managed, which is a huge, huge, huge problem. So have your project management systems in place before you hire a project manager if you don't have one, and then make sure that project manager follows those systems and does it that way, so that your project, so there's continuity. So if you need to hire a second one, everybody's handling it the same way, and so that all your data rolls up properly. When you don't have a project manager, your project management system becomes unusable and adoption goes down the drain. I can't tell you how many ClickUp portals I've looked at from agencies where it's like, okay, well, I have 20 people on my team, but nobody uses it. They just manage projects their own way, and then you waste all this time and money trying to implement this project management system, and then nobody uses it. Or they create their own rogue stuff all over the space and use it their own way, and it just becomes problematic. So then you as a CEO are trying to manage projects the way people within your team want to manage it. You have my permission to tell them, no, we all do this one way, and here's why. We have to be able to manage our projects a certain way. I know a lot of project CEOs get pushback from their key team members that want to do things their own way, and unfortunately it just can't happen that way. It's not scalable. Problem number 5, last but not least, lack of documentation and systems. Have your core processes documented in some fashion so that you know how to architect your tasks. There's a million different ways to do these things. We do webinars a lot for our clients. For example, there are about 18 to 20 subtasks for just that one parent task, but we have the whole thing documented. And a lot of times people will make a million tasks to do one thing when it's not necessary. Some of these tasks happen over a span of several weeks. So if you at least document it, or at least write down the key steps that it takes, you can kind of identify, all right, well, this part needs to be a task, this part needs to be a subtask, or maybe this needs to be just a checklist item, or maybe it's just, you know what I mean? You don't necessarily need to have a task for every little thing, but then people go in and they try to just hurry up and jot down a million tasks in ClickUp or whatever project management system they're using, and it doesn't end up working well. So have some sort of documentation of your core process. Here's some systems that you should document at minimum before you set up your ClickUp team, or before you start bringing everybody on. Onboarding of new team members is key. What is it that they need to do in order to find their tasks? What do they need to do in order to manage their tasks? Do they need to move it between statuses? What does each status mean? How do they hand stuff off? Are they allowed to create tasks? The answer is no. If they're an implementer, they should not be allowed to create their own tasks. A project manager should, or some sort of client manager should be able to create the tasks. I know it sounds cumbersome, but it's the way you manage continuity. Your tasks, I say it all over and over, your implementers are not project managers or task managers, they're implementers. How do they track time? How do they close out tasks, et cetera, et cetera? We don't let anyone close out tasks on our team. We allow them to move them to the done status. We do not allow them to actually close out the tasks, because we have follow-up things that the project manager needs to do. Like for our art tasks, they need to take the source files and make sure it's in our asset manager, right? For our, we want to make sure that the time is tracked, especially for new people who forget. We don't allow our team to track time after Fridays. You need to have all your time in by the end of the week. We also make sure that they're using their timers instead of just dumping in hours of time, because we can't get a real gauge of how long it takes to do things and manage how long it takes to do things and make sure that we're not underscoping or overscoping or whatever the case may be, or what have you. So we have those controls in place, and we've learned over time that that's what we need to do in order to maintain those controls. What do you do when a new client or project comes in? That process absolutely needs to be mapped, because it's going to dictate how you create new spaces, how you create new folders, how you create new tasks, how any task templates that need to be created, any automations that you can put in place, and then roles and responsibilities. Like here's how you handled your task. Here's how team members need to handle their tasks, and then eventually you want to document how your project managers need to be handling those tasks as well. An example again, for implementers, you're not allowed to create tasks, how to do a proper task handoff, no closing, how to track time, et cetera, et cetera. That's
Yeah,
it.
Just had a good question there. Someone was asking, what is an implementer?
I call implementers folks that are doing the work, your creatives, your writers, some of you guys have contractors, a hybrid of contractors and employees, right? They're not in here, the people who are not evaluating, they're not necessarily evaluating workload, et cetera, et cetera. They're not in that role. They're literally people who are just handling the projects and doing the projects.
Awesome. Yeah. So where can we find you if anyone wants to? So we're going to go into a few questions now, and we're going to kind of dive into a few topics of maybe how to do some of these things in practicalities. If anyone wants to connect with you after the webinar, where can they do that to get more help or find out more?
Sure. Sorry, I probably should have left that up. Let me find that. Here we go. There you go. Stay connected. Awesome. I'll leave that up for a minute. But yeah, happy to answer any questions.
Great. So I had a really great question here. I think it came up a couple of times from a couple of people. So first of all, thank you for that. For everyone watching, I told you that Amara gives you the tough truth about what you really need to do. And sometimes people don't get told this stuff and they kind of barrel down the pathway and don't have any of these systems in place. But I want to kind of dive in a little bit into what would it look like to start implementing these. So the first question was, okay, say someone's starting completely new in an agency, they're using ClickUp, what do they need to do? And I might chuck in a few ideas I have first, then I'm curious to see what you think. So I think the way I see it is there's two parts. There's the processes and then there's the templates. So what Amara uses an outside software. You can for documentation, you can also just use docs in ClickUp. So I would have a SOP doc, I have multiple pages, and you can link to individual pages on tasks, which is lovely. I then have those templates that she mentioned. So what does a new employee go through? What does a new project look like? And I think there's a couple of others as well. So I'd kind of set them up once in a generic way, save them as templates, and they'll get reused over and over. And that's kind of like the basic structure that you can start to work out from as like the first two things to do in ClickUp. But what would your perspective be on that?
I mean, when I work with consultants, the first thing we do is identify your project management methodology. If you don't have one, I just give them mine. But second, I identify how my back office is going to connect to my production. So second, identify how you want to structure your setup. Are you going to do spaces as clients? Are you going to have your projects as folders? What does that naming convention look like? What key services do you want to have as your list? It's different for every client. Some people only do web development, so that may not work for them. Some folks are like me and have several types of services that they offer. So it varies. So figure out what consistent structure you want for your space. And then you have tasks and task templates and things like that. I would find your core service, like the one thing that you do every single time you have a client, or the service that you provide the most, and document it pretty well, and build some task templates. First, just build out the actual task and how you want that to work, any checklists, any SOPs, anything, save it as a template, and then just start onboarding your team and create those views, create that everything view so people can see their tasks all in one place.
Awesome. Okay, and there's some great questions there as well. Got one here, particularly about that back office piece. So I'll read out this one. Or I guess I actually might summarize it. So basically, how do you connect ClickUp tasks with billing?
I use EverHour. EverHour allows you to choose whether you want to bill from the folder or bill from the list. I bill from the folder because I'm able to, they call them iterations, so it's a little bit different than lists, but they're essentially the same thing. Everything, you can set a budget for that folder. So that's why every single folder has its own budget, if you will, because that's what a project is. So that's how that integration works. And you can integrate with FreshBooks, or I use FreshBooks and QuickBooks. Don't ask me why, but FreshBooks is just a better invoicing software than QuickBooks, and then QuickBooks is better accounting, so whatever. Yeah, that's basically how I do it. I just you can literally put your how much there's different ways you can do it. You can do it hourly, you can do it fixed fee, et cetera, et cetera. So it just kind of all depends on how you manage your tasks or how you scope your projects.
Okay, and so for anyone who doesn't know, EverHour is one of the time tracking integrations that ClickUp offers. So is it that you track time in EverHour, which is on a task, and then from there it gets moved to either FreshBooks or QuickBooks or both?
Well, it integrates. So basically EverHour is pretty much looks like you'll see the little timekeeper thing in the ClickUp, So you can literally click on it in ClickUp and add your budget, how much that thing is, make it recurring, make it on that project. And then it's a B sync. So it doesn't do a two-way sync yet. It does a B sync where if you add an estimate within ClickUp, it'll sync to EverHour. And so as you just use the EverHour timer instead of the ClickUp timer. So I train my team on that, use the EverHour timer. So when they track time, it goes back into EverHour. So they don't have to actually like use EverHour per se. They just have to, you just have to have the integration. They just have to have the Chrome extension set up so that when they track time, then it has all the budgets in EverHour, and then it starts tracking your budget profitability. If you have your contractors or employees cost per hour in there, it'll tell you your cost, your probability, how much you charge per hour for their role. It'll also let you know if you're on track budget wise.
So for the end user, you're essentially in ClickUp on a task, you have a button for EverHour, and it goes straight to accounting and invoicing software. Okay, awesome. Cool. I've got a question here. Do you do daily time blocking? And if so, how?
Okay, so I've glazed through my project management methodology a little bit. It's a kind of interesting question. So I like getting things done from a personal standpoint. So I think a lot of times I see project managers and CEOs trying to manage their entire agency the same way they manage themselves, which isn't really helpful. So for myself, I love the Notepad tool with the extension. So I kind of like write down all the things I need to do. That's part of the getting things done methodology, dumping out all your inboxes into one spot, and and then blocking out all your time on your own. You can use the agenda tool there. You can use the Google, the calendar integration. For me, I don't use it because it's too convoluted. I have way too many things going on within my team, so it's not really effective for me to use that. But on my own personal calendar, I will time block. I use a different methodology from another expert that I used to follow a lot, Darren Hardy. He talks about using power hours, having hour and a half, 90-minute blocks for your day. So I'll like just drop tasks links during the day within those 90-minute blocks that I want to work on, so that I'm super focused on those items. But that's just my own productivity thing. I've even tried using lineup. I like it a lot, but I like also just having it in my calendar just so I can super focus on those tasks. I encourage my team to use lineup, and some people do, some people don't. We talk about it on our stand-up meetings, so that's kind of how they prioritize what they're going to do throughout the day. So if they're super focused, so they don't have to get distracted by all the things that are in there and seeing 100 tasks, but then they're bored or whatever. We can actually go through it during the stand-up to make sure that they're all on track and doing things they're supposed to be doing. So hopefully that answered your question.
think so. Yeah. Okay, I've got one
Okay,
here
good.
for Fahim. So you
Mhm.
mentioned the fulfillment side of stuff like having a space for a client. I think that's like the structure of things. What about managing your own agency like HR, finance, growth, sales? I think you touched on this. I think you said you had different spaces for those
Yeah,
extra like internal business functions. Okay,
yeah.
great.
Hmm.
Um, and then how do you establish a good, consistent project structure when you're beginning stages of establishing a product and process? So we kind of talked about that just before. So hopefully that one answered that question for you, Yumna. Um, cool. Someone was looking for the name of the app you use for SOPs. I believe it was Guru.
Yeah. It's getguru.com.
Okay, cool. And then in cases where your implementations are cross-functional, where your implementers are cross-functional, and also need to assign their own or other tasks in the absence of a production coordinator, is that best managed just with standardizing templating processes, or are there other tools? Yeah,
Don't
I'm
let
expecting.
them. Don't let them. They're not project managers. Like, I say all this to say, like, I know it seems like it's easier for your production folks to manage their own tasks. If you take a step back and look at where all your miscommunications happen, it's probably there. Um, there's no surefire way to ensure that all the right communications get in the right spot. If there's multiple people that have to touch a task, especially, that can be problematic. Um, yes, you can go in, and literally wrote this whole process on the ClickUp blog. I did a blog for ClickUp several months ago that has all this ideated and written down. So I don't know if I can find the blog post for you really quick and drop the link to it, but
Actually,
it's under,
the ClickUp support staff, if one of you can have a look at that and drop that in the chat, that would be amazing. Thank you.
yeah, absolutely. I kind of talk about this a little bit, but really you don't want them doing this. Trust me, create the tasks for them and you'll see where all the miscommunications are happening. If no one is actually owning the task management process, you have no line of sight as to what's working and what isn't. You don't know where the project inefficiencies. And yeah, you're thinking, well, this person does the same task over and over and over again. Well, then create it for them over and over and over again, or create some sort of redundancy or create some sort of automation so they don't have to do it, something, but don't let them create their own tasks.
Hmm. Which raises a question for me. What does it look like to be like a senior designer or content writer in your team? Like, is there a senior designation, or is that kind of just irrelevant?
Yeah, I have leads. I have a creative director, I have a lead developer, I have a content lead. I do have leads. So the way we manage it is I have a custom field for people, and I have my lead as lead, the custom field, the lead custom field, or what have you. And what we do is I create a separate view for each department. So it works better for me that way because um, just because something's in a design list doesn't mean the creative director is the lead for that. It could be a developer that's actually leading that and needs something designed a certain way for a UX person or UI person or something like that. So they know who to go to for questions. The lead can manage the status of that task in their own dashboard that's not interfering with their personal to-do list. So that's why I
Mm,
use the people.
mm. So if I'm understanding right, leads don't create tasks. That still kind
No,
of adheres to that same system. They just
yes.
make sure that all tasks are on track, basically.
Yeah. So leads don't create tasks because again, they don't have line of sight into the billing, into the back office part. Like it's
Mm,
so let's say you give the leads the ability to create tasks. And let's say you've estimated 10 hours for a project and something's out of scope and they're just adding 4 hours here, 3 hours there. They're not there to manage that project. Now, if your lead is a project manager, that's a different story. Um, you know, I did a consult with another client, their actual marketing department, not an agency. So it's a little bit different. If you're running a marketing department, you might be able to maybe get away with it, but I still personally believe that when you don't have a project manager create the tasks, and if you don't utilize task templates to make your life easier, you don't have line of sight as to what's going on and how your project management process needs to be modified to be more efficient.
mm. Okay, cool. So I've got a question here. How does your team put in a creative or project request to your project managers through ClickUp? Where does your process start?
Let me think, make sure I understand the question. So you're asking how does my team request, basically asking how does my team request a project or a task be put in?
I'm not sure. So in an agency, I'd expect it's a client requesting it.
Yeah.
Maybe your team would request it more if you're like in a big company that isn't an agency. So I'm a bit confused about that question. Let's say, how does a client request a project?
Yeah, you have an account manager or whoever is managing that client. You would obviously work with the project manager because every task needs to be attributed to some sort of bill, some sort of contract, some sort of somebody. So if your account manager is your project manager, that's fine. If that's their task, if that's their role to manage the budget and make sure the task gets created in the right place and with the minimum amount of information and all that good stuff, then that's how that would happen. One thing that you can do is have forms, use forms, and have it go into a big inbox and then have everything get delegated from there. Once the project manager, whoever checks the boxes and make sure everything's there and make sure it goes into the right budget, because otherwise it's going to be a mess. It's a huge mess.
Fair. Okay. Okay, and how much time did you invest teaching your team a standardized methodology? Did you notice an increase in productivity afterwards?
I mean, before it was never right. Like we could just never figure it out. Like it was just huge slogging headache. For every time we hired a new person, it took them months to figure out how to use it. And even still, they would revert back to their old ways. I wasn't able to hold people accountable to using our system. This was even the beginning of when we first had ClickUp, when we were on teamwork even. It was just really difficult to figure that out. And so, yeah, I can onboard someone in the first week if they have it figured out. And they're not saying they're trying to go on YouTube how to use ClickUp, which that's really not going to help them because this is my agency. This is our process. This is how we work. It doesn't matter how all the different buttons work. They don't need to know all the new features of ClickUp because that's where they end up getting distracted. Like, oh, I spent 3 hours today trying to figure out how to use ClickUp and how to use lineup and how to use all these things. No, here's where your tasks are. Here's what you do with that task. Here's how you use it.
Yep.
That's it,
Yep.
right? They need to spend their time working and doing the work and not trying to figure out how to use ClickUp.
Yep. Okay, next question is, okay, so how do you manage the spaces? So if you give each client a space, wouldn't you end up with a ton of spaces? From Eric.
Depends on how many clients you have. I mean, if a client's active, if we haven't worked on that client in more than 90 days, I just archive it. And if they come back, I unarchive it. So it keeps it clean.
Another good thing to note is that you can search in the navigation sidebar if you do have a lot of spaces. Also, quick switch is great if you do have a lot of navigation, Eric. So those can be helpful.
You can also use favorites.
Exactly. Yeah. Usually I do recommend people keep their spaces to a condensed list so that for easy access, easy overview. But there are certain exceptions like a marketing agency where it can just be worth having a huge list and using other tools to navigate.
And keep in mind though, if you have your everything view set up properly, what that eliminates is your team having to go into every single space and find tasks. So if a team member can't find a task, they say, hey, I can't find this task. It's not on my board. They have a project manager to go to. There's usually that means something's wrong with the task. Like they didn't put a tag on, they didn't do something. So they can, we use sprint weeks. Our sprints are weekly, not bi-weekly. But then the project manager knows where that task is. Again, you're eliminating the having to go through, figure out where it is, whatever. Say, oh, okay, here it is, and make sure it's on that person's board.
Okay, there's a couple of questions here. So what does your software stack look like? So ClickUp and I imagine this question can be quite big. So what are the main pieces at least?
For fulfillment or just the project management side?
I assume just the project management side.
Okay, yeah. So ClickUp, EverHour, and FreshBooks.
Right, cool.
Pretty much it.
And for fulfillment, is that like, Facebook ads and Google ads and all that kind of thing?
I'm assuming if they want to know the whole entire tech stack, we have a lot of tools. Oh yeah, and Guru, I forgot. They get Guru for SOPs and stuff.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So yeah, we won't go into that. That's a whole
There's one
separate
more.
thing.
There is one more that I use, Cloud App, for screenshots, annotations, screen grabs, screen videos, all that good stuff.
Okay, awesome. And someone was asking about the difference between EverHour and ClickUp time tracking. Why would you use one when ClickUp already has time tracking?
It's just way more robust. EverHours allows you to manage budgets a lot easier without you having to deal with. So for an agency like mine, where you have retainers and you want to see a budget minus time, there's a lot of calculations that have to happen for that to happen. You could do it in ClickUp. It would just mean everything would need to be set up absolutely perfect in order to do that for every single client, every single time. And that can be a little bit hard to do and take a lot of time. So EverHour just does it. So it's a lot easier to manage, and you can modify budgets, update budgets a little bit easier. And they have a lot of really cool reporting. So if you want to look at like reporting by person, and again, you can do a lot of that in ClickUp, but and I like the B sync, so you can still manage workload in ClickUp. I just like being able to attribute my time to invoices and stuff like that as well in EverHour, which there's really not much of an invoicing component in ClickUp yet. So
yeah, and that's what I've typically heard is that people, I typically recommend ClickUp time tracking because it's simple, it's right there. But the other plugins like EverHour have different reporting and invoicing pieces that sometimes are really useful. Like obviously in your case, it works really, really well that you've got it so nicely integrated.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. A couple more questions here. We've just got 5 more minutes. So someone asked, I'm not entirely sure. So how do you backlog sideways work, urgent work, or cross-team dependent work?
Okay, so how do you backlog? So when I hear backlog, I mean something that's like not needing to be worked on right now. So I have an actual list that's outside of a folder called backlog. So let's say we scoped out a project or scoped out a task, or a client is like, I need X, Y, and Z. We all know those clients that have like random projects that pop up out of nowhere. And if they decide they don't want to work on it, I don't want to lose all that info. So I just dump it in the backlog list. That's in a folder outside of any, it's not actually in a folder. It's actually a list outside of a folder in every client space. I actually have a client template that has client space. It has the folder for the project. It has my lists, and then it has an administrative list that's locked to only my business manager that has like for billing and stuff, if there's like billing tasks that need to go in there that she handles every month. And then there's my backlog list that's not within a folder that we put all that stuff in. So cross-departmental stuff. So I mean, if every list, task, whatever has the same statuses and you're using an everything view with a board view, that shouldn't be an issue. It should just roll up. And when you have your stand-up meetings every day, again, this is why having a project management methodology is helpful. Having that stand-up meeting every day, you can identify priorities, see what stuff's on fire. Because what project management tool doesn't do is take the communication factor out. Like you still need to talk to your team and see what's going on, right? And so, yeah, you can use the flags. Every task has to have a priority flag. If it's like, just get it done when you get it done, it's a blue flag. If it needs to be done within the next 24 to 48 hours, it's yellow flag. If it's do this first and don't do anything else until you touch it, and we're not allowed to have more than 3 red flags a day or else we're in trouble. Again, just having those processes, procedures, and standards in place so that stuff actually means something. So a lot of times we implement stuff that doesn't actually mean anything, and you know how to take action, make decision, correct, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully that answers the question.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay, and someone was just looking for the name of that screenshot app again.
Cloud App.
Cloud App. Okay, cool. Awesome. And I think that's it. We've got one more question here.
Sure.
So continuing on from not letting the team or implementers at least set tasks, I run an agency based on a freelance model with set times and prices. Okay. How do I manage the visibility of how they are doing? So
why do they need to visualize it? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So yeah, in ClickUp, that's pretty simple. So I'm kind of guessing he means outside of ClickUp, like how is the actual work progressing?
I mean, I think again, freelancers, they don't need to do anything but do their work. There's a time estimate there. They just need to stay within that time estimate, period. I wouldn't make it too complicated for the people that are implementing. You need visibility, they don't.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I think there's often a question there as well about like people want to figure out how far through a task is. Is this task half done, three quarters done? Is that something that you look into? I guess, is that just like your daily stand-up that takes care of that? Or how do you manage that?
Um, it depends on how your tasks are set up. I mean, we do a lot of subtasks with our parent tasks. When you have a million tasks that attribute to the same task, it kind of makes it difficult to manage. So I look at that from the subtask and parent task relationship. That makes it a lot easier, and you
Mm-hmm.
can look at progress and stuff like that a little bit that way.
Awesome. Nice. Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming on today. It's been really great.
You're
There's been a
welcome.
lot of really good points there for people. So for everyone who is watching, on screen, you can see where to contact Amara if you do want more input around marketing agencies, how to do it on ClickUp. If you want to find me, I'm over at workmanagement.tools, and hopefully we'll see you at the next webinar. Awesome.
Absolutely. Thank
Thank
you
you, Mara.
guys.
Have a great day and see you,
All
everyone.
right. Bye, guys.